They said my uniform would ruin the aesthetic. That's what they wrote in the wedding invitation. A handwritten note, folded neatly inside the envelope, tucked beside the RSVP card. Please don't wear your work uniform. We want to keep the vibe elegant. I read it 3 times thinking I'd misunderstood, but it was there, plain as daylight. My cousin's wedding, the first big family gathering in years, and I was already being told to hide a part of who I am. Not just any part. The part I bled for, the part I nearly died for. I work in the military. That's my job. But it's more than that. It's a commitment, a code, a brotherhood. My uniform isn't just fabric and metals. It's soaked in sweat, sand, silence, and sacrifice. And now they wanted me to leave it behind because it didn't fit their idea of beauty? Because it might make someone uncomfortable? The moment I read that note, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just a sharp, bitter chill, like standing in dress shoes at a funeral trying not to cry. I'd always been the quiet one in the family. The protector. The one who never made a scene. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and even my sister's graduation because I was stationed overseas. No one complained then. They just smiled and said, "We're proud of you." But now, in peacetime, in safety, surrounded by champagne glasses and floral centerpieces, I was somehow too much. I folded the letter back up with trembling fingers. There was something deeply ironic about the way it was worded. We want to keep the vibe elegant. Elegant. As if the most defining part of my life was suddenly messy. As if honor and discipline clashed with ivory linens and Pinterest centerpieces. I sat there in my kitchen, elbows on the table, staring at the letter for what felt like hours. Outside, a neighbor's kid was playing catch. The sun was warm, peaceful, exactly what I fought for. And yet, I was the eyesore. My cousin had always been close to me growing up. We climbed trees together, told each other secrets, and once, when I left for boot camp, she cried harder than my own sister. But people change. Time erodes some bonds and polishes others. I guess now she had a new life. One where people like me weren't part of the table settings. But it wasn't just her. A few days later, I called my mom to ask if she'd seen the note. There was a pause, too long, and then she said, "Yes. I heard from your aunt that they just want to keep things simple." I bit my tongue. Simple. That was a new word for it. I didn't argue, I just nodded, though she couldn't see it. And for the rest of the day, I didn't touch my uniform. I couldn't. It felt like touching a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. They said my uniform would ruin the aesthetic. But in that moment, sitting alone in the kitchen with that invitation still trembling in my hands, I realized something far more painful. It wasn't the uniform they were afraid of. It was the truth it carried. And now I had to decide what to do with that truth. Hide it, or wear it louder than ever before. Friends, let me pause for just a moment. Please take a second to write in the comments. Where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and sharing this video. By doing so, you're helping us grow this channel and reach more hearts with stories that matter. Now, let's continue. I tried to forget it. I really did. I folded the note and slid it back into the envelope, telling myself it wasn't worth getting worked up about. Maybe it was just poor wording. Maybe they didn't mean anything by it. Just an awkward attempt at being classy. But the words kept echoing in my head like a slow leak in the ceiling. Please don't wear your work uniform. It wasn't just a request. It was something else. A message buried under sugar-coated phrasing. By the next morning, it gnawed at me. Not because I was offended, but because I couldn't stop asking the question, why? Why would someone feel the need to say that? Had anyone else received special instructions for what not to wear? Had someone told Uncle Mark not to bring up politics? Had they asked Aunt Lydia to skip her loud floral dresses? I needed answers, not to create drama, but to understand. Because if there was one thing the military teaches you, it's how to read between the lines, how to see what's not being said. So I called my mom. She picked up, cheerful as always, asking how I was doing. I told her about the invitation, trying to keep my voice light, casual, like I wasn't already holding my breath. And then I asked the question directly. Did they say anything to you about me not wearing the uniform? There was a pause. Not the kind that comes when you're thinking. The kind that comes when you're choosing between truth and comfort. She sighed quietly. Your aunt mentioned something, just in passing. She said it might make people uncomfortable, that they want to keep things neutral. Neutral? That word hit harder than I expected. I wasn't a political stance. I wasn't a debate topic. I was family. I'd spent years overseas, sleeping in the dirt, missing Christmases, washing blood off my hands that didn't always belong to enemies. I stood in silence at flag-draped coffins while bugles played. I had watched young men breathe their last breath with the kind of quiet that scars you. And now that was too much? Too loud for a wedding? Too complicated for a photo backdrop? My mother tried to soften it, of course. She always did. They didn't mean it in a bad way, sweetheart. You know how your aunt is. She just wants everything to go smoothly. Smooth, elegant, neutral. 3 words that now felt like a slap to everything I had lived through. It wasn't about the uniform anymore. It was about what they thought it represented. Not honor, not sacrifice, but conflict, discomfort, division. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not that strangers felt that way, but that family, my own blood, would rather hide what I'd given my life to than risk a few uncomfortable glances. I didn't argue with my mom. What would be the point? She wasn't the enemy in this. She was just the messenger. But when we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. There's a particular kind of loneliness that settles in when you realize you're only celebrated when your story stays convenient. When you're the hero in theory, but a problem in practice. And in that silence, the metal in the wooden box called out to me, not as a weapon, not as a protest, but as a reminder of who I was, of what I'd survived, and of everything they didn't want to see. And I knew deep down this wedding wasn't going to be just another family event. It was going to be something else. A moment of quiet defiance, a test of dignity. And I was already preparing for it. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the words looping in my mind like a broken recording. Keep things elegant, stay neutral, might make people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Was it uncomfortable when I sat in silence beside a dying boy who was younger than my little brother, pressing my hands over a wound I couldn't close, whispering it was going to be okay, though we both knew it wasn't? Was it uncomfortable when I stood in 130-degree heat for hours, pulling security in a village where kids had to play between ruins and landmines? Was it uncomfortable when I zipped up a body bag for someone I used to laugh with during chow time? They called that a job, but it was more like a war I carried inside me, one that never really ended. And now they wanted to reduce it to a fashion choice, a disruption, something better left at home. I sat up in bed, my chest tight, breathing heavy, not from panic, not from fear, from rage. But it wasn't the loud, violent kind. It was the quiet kind that simmers low and deep, the kind born from betrayal, not by enemies, but by the ones you thought would never look away. Funny how that works. In war you expect bullets, you prepare for pain, you accept the risk. But no one prepares you for the sting of being unwanted at a dinner table because your truth no longer matches their curated version of reality. They wanted elegance. What did they think war was? Just dirt and death? War is holding your breath as you open a suspicious door. War is learning how to laugh with people whose language you don't speak, because you both know what loss looks like. War is carrying the weight of mistakes, of orders you followed, and consequences you never speak of. War is a silence that lingers long after the guns go quiet. And that silence was louder now than ever. They didn't want that version of me. Not at the wedding, not near the champagne, not in the family photos. Maybe they just wanted the smiling cousin. The one who sends postcards from overseas, shows up once in a while, shakes hands with the uncles and says nothing about where he's been. Maybe they preferred the idea of me, clean, polished, polite, without the reality that clings to my skin like the desert. I walked into the living room. The box was still there. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside, the metals didn't sparkle. They were dulled from age, from dust, from time. But they carried weight. Not just physical. Memory, pain, brotherhood. And I held one in my hand. The one that cost me my hearing in one ear, my ability to sleep through fireworks, and a part of my soul I'm not sure I'll ever get back. I remembered the sound of the explosion, the way my ears rang, the way my hands shook, and the way my team still pulled me out, still shouted my name until I opened my eyes. Is that what made them uncomfortable? Not the uniform, but the fact that it reminded them someone else had paid for their comfort. I sat there until the sun came up. My chest ached, not from grief, but from the weight of having to pretend. Pretend I wasn't hurt. Pretend I didn't care. Pretend it didn't matter that the people I once fought to protect now saw me as a disruption to their perfect day. But I wouldn't pretend much longer. They told me not to wear the uniform. Fine. But they never said I couldn't wear the truth. A few days passed, and still, the words from that invitation clung to me like damp smoke, refusing to lift, refusing to let me breathe. I told myself to let it go, to not take it personally. But it was personal. It always is when people ask you to silence a part of yourself that was forged in fire. The truth started to bleed through in quiet conversations and hushed phone calls. Not everyone meant to hurt me. Some were just clumsy, others intentional. I heard from my cousin's older sister, soft-spoken, kind, who called to ask if I was still planning to attend. There was hesitation in her voice, the kind people use when they're about to say something that's going to sting. That's when I learned what no one had dared say aloud. The groom's family, well-off, progressive, highly educated, they didn't agree with the military, thought it was dangerous, corrupt, oppressive. That's the word she used, oppressive. They thought my presence in uniform would feel like a political statement, like I was parading something violent into a peaceful celebration, a reminder of things they didn't want to think about. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the floor tilt slightly under my feet. All those years I spent eating sand in a country most of them couldn't even locate on a map. All those nights staring up at foreign skies, wondering if I'd live to see another sunrise. And now I was a statement? An ideological problem wrapped in dress blues? They were worried that I might spark something just by showing up. I don't remember ever asking for attention. I don't remember ever standing in the spotlight. In fact, most of us come home hoping to blend in, to shrink ourselves down so we don't have to explain things we can barely explain to ourselves. But somehow, by existing in their curated little world of clinking wine glasses and whispered philosophies, I was already too much. I thought about how strange this was, that someone else's opinion about war and politics, about uniforms and medals, suddenly had the power to erase everything I'd lived through. Not just erase it, sanitize it, turn it into an inconvenience. But here's the thing. I never needed to make a statement. I didn't go to war for applause. I didn't sign up so someone could clap when I walked through an airport in uniform. I didn't do it for a flag on my casket or a speech at my funeral. I did it because someone had to. Because service to me meant protecting the freedom of people I would never meet, even those who would later look me in the eye and tell me they don't believe in what I stood for. My life has never been about proving a point. It is the point. So no, I wasn't going to show up to that wedding as a protest. But I wasn't going to disappear either. If my silence made them more comfortable than my sacrifice, that was on them. If my truth clashed with their centerpieces and their color scheme, then maybe the problem wasn't me at all. And that was the moment I stopped feeling unsure. That was the moment I stopped second-guessing. I wasn't going to fight them. I'd already fought enough. But I was going to show up. Not in uniform, but not invisible either. And when I did, they would see everything they tried so hard not to. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my closet, staring at hangers like they held answers. On one side, a clean-pressed suit, dark gray, tailored, safe. The kind of outfit that slips into a crowd and doesn't make a sound. It wouldn't upset anyone. It wouldn't challenge anything. It would nod and smile and keep things elegant. On the other side, there was nothing. Because my uniform wasn't even in the closet. It was in the storage chest beneath my bed. And I knew I wouldn't wear it. Not because I agreed. Not because I felt ashamed, but because I understood something now. They didn't deserve the honor of seeing me in it. That uniform belonged to moments they would never understand, to funerals I couldn't forget, to brothers I couldn't bring home. But still, I couldn't just wear that suit and pretend nothing happened. I couldn't walk in there and let them erase it all with a smile and a side hug. I wasn't going to be neutral, so I turned, and I looked at the wooden box in the corner. Small, scratched, stained at the edge from some oil that had leaked onto it during a move. But inside lived a history I never put into words. I walked over and knelt in front of it. My fingers moved slowly over the latch, like opening a door to something holy. It clicked open, and there they were. My medals. Not polished, not dusted, just real. Each one earned through something I rarely spoke of. I ran my fingers across the surface of each: Bronze Star, campaign ribbons, combat action badge. The metal was cold, but the memories burned. And then I saw that one, the one I still sometimes dream about. The one that came with a flag folded into a perfect triangle, and the sound of my mother sobbing over the phone because she thought I was dead. The medal they gave me after the blast, after I pulled 2 men out of a burning vehicle, after I spent a week in a hospital, lungs full of smoke, eardrum ruptured, vision blurred. The medal that cost me part of my hearing, months of nightmares, and the ability to stand near a firework display without shaking. I picked it up. It wasn't large. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. It was truth wrapped in bronze and ribbon. And at that moment, I knew this was what I'd wear. Not for them, not to provoke, not to challenge, but for me. I didn't need to wear the uniform to carry the weight. That weight was in my spine, in my bones, in every slow breath I took when a door slammed too loud or someone walked up behind me too fast. I would wear the medal, just one, proudly, quietly over my heart, because it had to be seen. Because some truths don't need words. Because sometimes the most powerful message is the one you don't speak. I stood up, holding the medal in my hand, and I felt calm, for the first time in days. Not angry, not bitter, just clear. They told me not to wear my work clothes. Fine. But they never told me I had to leave my story behind. And I wasn't about to. That afternoon I stood in front of the mirror, the metal gleaming softly against the fabric of my dark shirt. No uniform, no ribbons cluttering my lapel. Just one small circle of bronze, suspended on its ribbon, nestled above my heart. I felt the rough edges imprint through the cloth, a quiet promise of everything it represented. The nights spent in foxholes, the weight of the pack on my shoulders, the whispered prayers before each mission. I stepped outside and felt the sun on my face, heard children laughing a block away. It was so ordinary, so peaceful, the very world I fought to protect. And yet this meek piece of metal carried a thunderstorm within it. No banners, no salutes, just the steady beat of my heart echoing against that cold metal, louder than any brass ensemble. As I drove to the venue, other cars slowed beside me, drivers glancing at the tiny glint pinned to my chest through the window. I imagined their thoughts. Who is he? What did he do? Was he a hero or trouble? But I didn't need their approval. I needed only to honor the ones who never came home, whose stories ended in silence. When I arrived, I passed between waitstaff holding trays of champagne and guests in pastel dresses, their laughter tinkling like wind chimes. A few eyebrows rose. A few whispers followed as I moved through the crowd, but I held my head high, every step a statement. This isn't vanity, it isn't a protest. It's life carved into metal and memory, and it belongs here just as much as any floral arrangement. In that moment, the metal became more than an accessory. It was a bridge between war and peace, loss and celebration, the past and this fragile, beautiful present. And though my lips remained still, the silence around me thundered with truths that no wedding planner could ever erase. The doors swung open, and for a heartbeat the chatter hushed as I stepped into the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over gleaming marble floors and tables draped in ivory. I moved forward, shoulders squared, feeling the weight of every gaze settle on me like a tangible force. No camouflage. No camouflage, but they recognized the shape of my carriage, the set of my jaw, the quiet authority in my posture. Hushed whispers slid through the crowd like a current under still water. I saw heads tilt, brows knit, lips part mid-sentence before they swallowed the words back down. A woman in a pearlescent shawl glanced at my medal, then at me, her eyes narrowing for an instant. A teenage boy nudged his date, nodding toward my chest as though I were a curiosity in a museum. Even the waiters paused with their trays, the clink of glasses caught in midair. I felt the pulse in my throat, tried to steady it, but I didn't want to hide. I didn't want to shrink. Every step was deliberate, a silent assertion that I belonged here just as much as anyone else. The soft fabric of my shirt pressed the metal closer to my heart, reminding me of the sacrifices it represented. In that moment, I wasn't a guest. I was a testament of danger faced and overcome, of nights spent under foreign skies, of promises kept in the smoke of battle. They didn't like it. I could see it in the way they shifted their weight, in the quick sideways glances and the brief tightening of shoulders, but I refused to avert my eyes or lower my chin. Instead, I lifted my gaze, meeting theirs with unflinching calm. Let them see the truth reflected back. Let them feel the ripple of it. And then, as if breaking a spell, a soft murmur of approval rose from the back of the room. My grandfather's voice, ragged with emotion, followed by a slow, steady clap. Others joined in, hesitant at first, then swelling into a wave of recognition. In that thunderous silence, I realized the arrival wasn't just mine. It was theirs, too, the moment they had to reckon with what they'd tried to erase, and choose whether to honor it or ignore it. I stood still, letting the applause wash over me, knowing that this wedding day would be marked by more than vows and floral arrangements. It would be marked by the weight of a single, shining truth. The buzz of conversation swirled around me like a restless tide, but one voice sliced through the hum, a familiar clipped tone belonging to the groom's uncle. He leaned in close enough for me to catch every word, his lips curving into an insolent smirk as he nodded toward the medal. "That's quite an accessory," he said, his eyebrow arching in polite disdain. I felt the ache in my chest tighten, the old wound of judgment opening anew, but I held my expression in check, offering nothing more than a calm, measured smile. Behind him, someone else let slip the words I'd feared. "Thought we agreed on no uniforms." Their voice was low, a half-hearted attempt to disguise the barbed impatience. I turned my head slightly, just enough for the edge of my gaze to meet theirs, then looked away, letting the silence speak the rest. Because this wasn't about uniforms. It wasn't about dress codes or aesthetic harmony. It was about memory. And I carried those memories in my veins, in every breath I drew. I replied lightly, almost softly, "This isn't a uniform, it's a memory." The words hung in the air, suspended between their world of curated comfort and mine of untold battles. I could feel the collective exhale, a ripple of discomfort that spread among them like a stone dropped in still water. It wasn't malice exactly, more like shock at the weight of something they'd tried to gloss over. In that moment, I sensed all the small judgments, the polite turns of their heads, the quick adjustments of their napkins, the feigned interest in hors d'oeuvres as they swept their eyes away. They saw only the glint of bronze, the ribbon's muted colors, and they judged me for daring to bring history into their delicate bubble. Yet with each measured step I took past their stares, the medal pressed closer to my heart, reminding me that some truths aren't meant to fit into someone else's vision of elegance. They're meant to break through the facade, to demand acknowledgement, to insist that memory, no matter how inconvenient, has a place in every room where stories are told. The hall fell into a hush as he rose, my cousin, the groom, all crisp tuxedo and practiced smile. For a moment, he looked every bit the perfect host, polished, poised, grateful. He lifted his glass and spoke of love, of family, of laughter that filled the rooms of childhood homes. He thanked the doctors who heal our bodies, the teachers who shape our minds, even those who fight social media wars, for keeping us informed in a digital age. The words rolled out elegantly, drawing nods and applause from every corner, except where I sat. When his gaze swept across the tables, it lingered on everyone but the men and women in uniform, on the painters who brighten their neighborhoods, on the volunteers who feed the homeless, on the activists who march in city streets. Then it passed over me as though I were a ghost, my medal glinting in the soft light, a silent witness strapped to my chest. In that instant, it felt as if all the years I'd spent standing sentry in midnight deserts, kneeling beside fallen brothers, had been erased from his memory. A cold ache settled in my rib cage, heavier than any gear I'd ever carried. I remembered the first patrol I led, the way the dawn broke through sandstorms like a promise, the way my men trusted me with their lives, and how I'd taken that trust into every decision, every firefight, every mission that didn't end with a final transmission. And here, in this elegant ballroom, my service was invisible, unworthy of a single word. Around me, people clinked glasses, their smiles warm and sincere. I wanted to stand, to point to the bronze circle over my heart and demand recognition for all the nights I'd gone without sleep so they could celebrate their weddings in safety. But I stayed seated, breath steady, because sometimes courage isn't in the shout, it's in enduring the silence and knowing unwaveringly that your truth still stands. When my cousin tapped me on the shoulder and held out the microphone, her hand trembled just a fraction, barely perceptible, but enough to crack the polite veneer she'd been maintaining all evening. She swallowed, smiled, and said, "Do you want to say something?" I nodded, feeling a slow rush of heat from my heart up through my throat. The chatter hushed as I stood, every eye turning toward me, curious. I pressed my palm against the cool metal of the metal, feeling its ridges under my fingertips. In that instant, I recalled the faces of comrades I'd lost. Their laughter in the mess hall, their steady presence in ambushes. The way they'd said my name one last time before going silent. I drew in a slow breath and stepped toward the center of the room, the spotlight catching the ribbon's muted colors, turning them almost luminous against the dark fabric of my shirt. "Thank you for inviting me here tonight," I began, voice steady but carrying the weight of every story that metal held. I paused, letting those words settle. Because gratitude isn't always simple. It can be tangled with regret and longing, with the knowledge that some souls aren't here to share in the celebration. The room was still. Even the music receded into a soft hum, as if waiting. I lifted my hand to brush against the metal again. "This isn't about pride," I said, my voice low but clear, each word purposeful. "It's about remembering those who didn't come back, who don't get to be here." A shiver seemed to course through the hall, as if the air itself recognized the absence of the fallen. I felt a tear catch behind my eye, but I refused to blink it away. I owed them that much. An unbroken gaze, a voice to speak for them even now. Silence stretched out, thick and trembling, before a single clap broke through. Soft at first, then growing as others joined in. I saw tears glisten on cheeks I never expected, hands reaching out in solidarity. In that moment, my words had done what uniforms and medals alone could not. They had opened a doorway into shared remembrance, turned discomfort into empathy, and forged a connection deeper than any family bond I'd known before. I stepped back, feeling the metal's weight settle over my heart like a benediction. For a moment the world felt right, honest, raw, undeniable. And as the applause swelled around me, I knew that this story, this night, would live on in every hand extended, every whisper of thanks, every memory held silent but sacred. The moment my words faded, the air turned thick, heavy with unspoken things. Not a single hand moved, no polite applause, no rustle of napkins, just a hush that pressed in on me, as if the room itself were holding its breath. I saw jaws tighten, shoulders slump, eyes flick toward the floor. Discomfort bloomed like a stubborn stain, and shame, quiet, earnest, glimmered in a few eyes I met. I lowered the microphone, heart pounding, waiting for the first clap to break the spell, but none came. The weight of absence, of every fallen friend, every silent family member, hovered between us, unclaimed. I could almost taste the tension, metallic and raw, like the aftershock of an explosion. Then, from the edge of the crowd, came a single, deliberate clap. I turned my head and saw him, my cousin's grandfather, his shoulders stooped by age and years of his own battles, face lined with stories only he knew. He stood, slow and unsteady at first, and clapped once, so deliberately it echoed. And then he clapped again, soft at first, then with more certainty, until his applause grew steady, unwavering. His hands were worn, veins mapping life's journey, but each strike carried the authority of someone who understood loss, who respected sacrifice. The silence cracked. One by one, others noticed. A woman, halfway across the room, glanced at him, then at me, and her hands moved together in a timid clap. A man near the buffet raised his glass in a silent salute before his palm met the other in a soft applause. Like ripples in a pond, the grandfather's courage spread outward. Claps multiplied, hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction, until the room was filled with the sound of acknowledgement. It wasn't thunderous, but it was honest, A verdict rendered not by ceremony planners or decorum, but by hearts stirred from indifference to empathy. I felt my chest swell, not with pride, but with gratitude for that single act of recognition. In the gentle chorus of applause, I heard the creaking doors of understanding open just a crack. It was a moment of profound connection, where the gulf between my world and theirs narrowed in the simple act of sounding hands. As the final echoes faded, I realized something vital. Sometimes the loudest affirmation comes not from the many, but from the one brave enough to stand when everyone else remains seated. And in that courageous stand, a room full of people discovered a shared heartbeat, pulsing through the quiet that followed, a heartbeat of remembrance, respect, and unspoken unity. After the flurry of glasses and conversations quieted into gentle hums, I drifted toward the terrace, the night air cool against my skin. The lights from the hall flickered behind me, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see the bride, her eyes rimmed with something like regret, soft, honest regret. She reached out, fingertips brushing the ribbon of my medal as if afraid to touch the past itself. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried more weight than any toast I'd heard that night. "I didn't know they said those things about your uniform," she said, each word deliberate, trembling with sincerity. "I'm sorry, that wasn't fair." In that quiet confession, the swirl of tension and judgment that had shadowed me all evening began to dissolve. It wasn't theatrical or grand. It was human and unguarded. She stood there, vulnerable in her remorse, and suddenly the gulf between us collapsed. I saw in her something I hadn't felt in hours, genuine understanding. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief. Relief that someone had bothered to look beyond the polished event and recognize the person who carried a lifetime in a single piece of metal. Relief that, after all the whispers and sideways glances, someone finally spoke the simple truth. It hurt to be judged for service that no one else was willing to understand. I reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her apology anchor into my heart. I told her it was okay, that I knew she hadn't meant harm, only that sometimes people hide behind elegance to avoid uncomfortable realities. And in that exchange, I felt seen, truly seen, not as a uniformed soldier or an inconvenient reminder, but as a cousin, a friend, a human being with stories worth hearing. We stood there for a long moment, silhouettes against the soft glow of lanterns, two souls recognizing the truth in each other's words. And for the first time that night, I felt a weight lift, the weight of being unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. In its place settled something new, the possibility of genuine connection, of healing conversations that go beyond roles and appearances. As she slipped back inside to join her new husband, I exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to the metal at my chest. The cool metal felt alive under my fingers, resonating with the promise that keeping truth in the open, even when it hurts, can bridge divides and forge understanding where once there was only silence. In the soft afterglow of the celebration, as tables were cleared and the music mellowed, a handful of guests found their way to me, one by one, gently and almost furtively. They caught me in hallways or corners of the terrace, each approaching with hesitant steps, voices lowered as if sharing a secret too precious for the crowded room. A woman in a lavender dress paused beside me, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she murmured, her hand brushing mine where the metal rested. "My husband fought alongside you once. He never talked about it until tonight." Her words trembled on the edge of tears, and she nodded as if I'd invited her to release years of unspoken grief. Later, a middle-aged man with kind eyes slipped an envelope into my hand. "For your journey," he said, voice thick. Inside was a small note of appreciation and a gift card to a counseling retreat. He whispered, "My son came home and couldn't talk about what he saw. Maybe it'll help." Then near the door, a young woman in sequins, barely more than a girl, stepped forward. She hesitated, glancing at the medal, then at my face. "My brother served too," she whispered, voice cracking. "I wish I had your courage." I saw in her something raw and hopeful, the desire to connect with the part of her brother he'd left behind, the part she'd never known how to honor. Each apology was quiet, intimate, a shared secret that mended a small tear in the fabric of understanding. No one sought attention or accolades. They simply needed to acknowledge what they'd overlooked, what they'd tried to smooth over with polite smiles. And in those hushed moments, the weight of judgment eased, replaced by empathy that glowed brighter than any chandelier light. By the end of the night, I realized that the medal had done more than honor the fallen. It had opened hearts that had once looked away, inviting them to step closer, to speak truths they'd kept locked away. In those quiet apologies, I saw a new chapter begin, one of healing and shared remembrance, woven from courage whispered in the dark. The night air was cool as I stepped out toward the parking lot, the hum of distant goodbyes fading behind me. The lights of the hall glowed like beacons in the dusk, but my thoughts were heavy with the weight of everything that had unfolded. Then I saw her, my aunt, waiting by the polished black car, hands clasped as if she'd rehearsed her words 1,000 times. Her eyes met mine, brimming with something I hadn't expected to see: contrition. She swallowed, then spoke softly, voice nearly lost in the whisper of wind through the trees. "I was wrong," she confessed, each syllable fragile, yet steady. "We were afraid of conflict, but we created a different kind." I stood still, heart fluttering with the ache of years spent trying to earn approval I never needed, and said nothing. I only nodded because words felt too easy, or too late, to bridge the distance that had grown between us. She reached out, tentative, and placed her fingers on the ribbon of my medal. The metal was cold against her touch, but I could feel the warmth behind it, remorse, understanding love. Her hand trembled slightly, as if she were cradling something sacred. "He would have been proud," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you." In that moment, memories flooded me. Childhood laughter in her kitchen, her gentle encouragement when I marched off to training, the way her eyes glistened when I left for deployment. All the small kindnesses I'd crushed under my own pride, thinking I had to prove myself anew. Now here she was, offering something I had longed for more than medals or recognition, true acceptance. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. The parking lot lights blurred as tears pricked behind my eyelids, not of sorrow, but of release. Years of silence, of unspoken expectations, dissolved in that single touch and confession. No more defensive walls, no more questions of worthiness. When I opened my eyes, her gaze was tender. "Thank you," I finally said, voice low but real. She smiled, a soft, relieved curve of her lips, and when she let go I felt the metal pulse against my chest, a steady heartbeat reminding me that honor isn't given in grand ceremonies but in moments like this, when fear yields to understanding, and families mend the fractures they once denied. We stood there a while longer, two souls reunited in the quiet glow of the lot, before she turned and walked back to the hall. And as I watched her retreat, I realized that the greatest victories aren't on distant battlefields, but in the fragile terrain of the heart. That night, as I stepped away from the glow of the venue and down the long drive toward my car, the wind caught the hem of my coat and lifted it like an unseen hand honoring my steps. I slowed, letting the breeze tease the fabric, reminding me that every gust carried whispers of memory, of distant sandstorms, of midnight watches beneath alien stars, of brothers lost and promises kept in silence. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their applause or their polite bows. I felt no emptiness in the absence of grand gestures, only a quiet certainty that I had done right. I'd chosen not to wear the uniform they feared would ruin the aesthetic, but I'd worn something far rarer, my truth pinned to my chest for all to see. In the soft glow of the parking lot lights, I paused and placed a hand over the metal, feeling its cool edge press through the cloth. It did not glimmer like a jewel. It bore the patina of trials endured. It bore the shape of a life defined by service, sacrifice, and unspoken stories. And that was enough. I thought of my fallen comrades, of mothers who wept at news of flags and bugles, of children who grew up hearing only half the story. I thought of the grandfather whose clap broke the hush, of the bride's apology on the terrace, of quiet hands that touched the metal with reverence, Their respect was the true reward, not the fleeting nods of well-wishers, but the deeper understanding that sometimes the most powerful presence is a silent one. As I slid into the driver's seat, the engine's rumble felt like the steady beat of my own heart. I looked back once at the scene of the night, soft lights, fading laughter, the promise of fresh beginnings, and I felt no bitterness, only peace. I was walking away not defeated, but honored, by my own choices, by the honest reflections I'd witnessed, by the knowledge that courage need not roar to be heard. I started the car and rolled forward, the road stretching ahead like a ribbon of possibilities. The metal rested over my heart, a quiet anthem that spoke louder than any words could. I didn't wear the uniform they feared, but I carried its essence with me. In resilience, in integrity, in the steadiness of knowing who I was and what I stood for. And so I left that night, stepping into the darkness with the wind at my back and the truth in my chest, ready for whatever lay beyond the turn in the road, undaunted, unbowed, and walking away with honor,